Tilda, what is this alien-looking thing?
I was hoping I could hang it around my neck.
Want to try?
But I don't know, I need a harness. This is an amazing thing. This is, these awards, whatever. But this is the Fellowship Award for the BFI, and it's a beautiful thing. I don't know who designed it, but of course it is 24 frames a second at some level, interpreted in glass.
And you got this yesterday. This is the,
Oh, I've just seen that it's got something written. I haven't got my glasses on. It's got something written along the edge. I said that was quite nice that it had nothing written, but now I see that it's got something written around the edge.
What does it say?
Oh, I can't. It's too embarrassing. But anyway, it's just,
I can't read that. It's tiny.
And you're wearing glasses.
Yeah, but okay. Fellowship for the outstanding contribution to film, television, and moving image culture.
There you go. Thank you. My honor.
I know that there are several awards that you've picked up over the years, Tilda, and I wonder whether there's one that you remember particularly fondly.
Yes, an award I got from you,
my lord. Well done.
That is the correct answer. And I will tell you that it's actually out of a drawer in my little book room. It is fantastic. Actually out of the drawer.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, and I didn't give it away.
This is the Kermode Award from the Culture Show, which is a little statuette of me, which
it's beautiful. It's a moving thing
to take home and love and cherish. I'm so glad. So you haven't dumped it somewhere?
No, I haven't. I didn't give it away. It was very, very treasured.
Werner Herzog's lost his. And he got shot with me, and I feel that was a kind of, that was a bonding moment, and then he just lost the award.
What was it? Somebody stole it, or he just...
No, he just said, we were having a conversation about the fact I was interviewed him once, and he got shot during the interview on camera.
Come on, we've got to know more about this. What do you mean? Where?
No, is it
going to happen in here?
It was for the Culture Show. I was interviewing him on, this is a piece about you, incidentally, but I was interviewing him about something, and he was standing on a promontory in Los Angeles, and he said, well, the thing is that, I've left Germany. It's a closed road. They're no longer interested. Nobody likes my films. And then there was this thing, boom, and his trousers exploded. This little bit here went, boom, and he looked down and he went, oh, someone is shooting at us. We'd better leave. I'm not making this up. It was on camera, and he had a bullet in his thing.
Or it's an amazing stunt.
Yeah, no, it's really, there's a whole conspiracy theory about how we set the whole thing up.
Wow.
But no, it's absolutely true. He got shot. Anyway.
Wow.
So anyway, let's talk about your fabulous career. We have a number of clips to show, and as I said before, they do it is really only scratching the surface. I do want to begin with showing a clip from Caravaggio, and then I'd like to talk a bit. I know that you've talked a lot about this, but I'd like to talk a bit about Derek Jarman, in particular, what's happening with Jarman's estate now. So this is a clip from Caravaggio, which I imagine everybody has seen, but do you want to say something, because this was very early in your film career, and do you want to say something before we see the clip? It's the coins.
Caravaggio is the first film that I ever made in 1985, and there's Sandy Powell, resplendent, the great Sandy Powell, and there are several of us. I mean, there were always several new recruits on Derek's films, but on Caravaggio, Sandy had just come out of art school, and Simon Fisher Turner tipped up to do the music, and I tipped up, I don't know where, and from squatting here. And we were complete kindergarten kids, and he took us in and basically made filmmakers of us. Doesn't mean we became directors necessarily, but we became filmmakers with him. And Caravaggio is a very precious film. I'm really, really stoked that people are going to see it here, because it's, well, I don't know. I think it's as fresh as the day. I saw it not that long ago myself. I don't know when you last saw it.
Just last week.
Yeah, it's, you will have a look at it and see it. But it's, I don't know, what's the clip? Oh, the clip. Yes, I know the clip. You just told me.
It's the coins in the mouth, with Sean Bean looking absolutely sexy as hell.
Phenomenal, yeah. Sheen Bean. And what can I tell you about Caravaggio? Well, that was a long, long time ago, 1985. Derek, when I first met him, had been working on the script for about 11 years with all sorts of people, including Suso Cecchi D'Amico, who used to work with Pasolini, and finally got the BFI to give him the money to make it. And we made it in unsoundproofed warehouses in where they were building Canary Wharf, Limehouse. And here's a wonderful story about necessity being the mother of invention. They were building Canary Wharf over the water, and there was a hammer going all day as we were shooting. And constantly this person with the hammer was asked to be quiet and was being bribed with bottles of whiskey. And he either got just so hammered or just over it that he just went on hammering. And at the end, of course, all the rushes came in and there was this hammer over it. And Derek decided, okay, we're going to go for this. We're going to make this a part of the aesthetic of the film, and started infiltrating all sorts of modern things like typewriters. And then on the soundtrack, just after we shot, we went, Budge Tremlett, who's the sound designer, and Simon Turner and Derek and I went to Italy and gathered this kind of modern, eclectic Vespers, people with their We walked down these little streets and listened to people's wirelesses through their windows, and that's the soundtrack. But it was all because of this hammer, this rogue hammer operator who was building Canary Wharf. And that's what we got, because we didn't have any soundproofing. And we were in these, Christopher Hobbs, who designed it, divided up this very blank space into different chambers, and was dressing and creating these different chambers, and we'd be shooting in one, and then we'd move through, and we'd move through, and we'd move through. And and that was very similar to the way in which we made Edward II in a studio.
Let's take a look at the clip. The lovely thing about this is it's not dialogue, it's all to do with visuals and looks. So here we go, this is from Caravaggio. What was it about Jarman that made the collaboration so special? Because I only met him at the very, very end of his life, when he was not well, but he was incredibly enthusiastic about talking about his work. I'd gone there to interview him for a radio interview, and I was worried at first that that he should he be working, but he just wanted to talk about movies. He just didn't want to stop.
It was like asking, should he be living? I mean, really, he was very open about the way in which he came from a generation, and for us younger ones with him, us chicks, he was very open about the way in which he represented, or he had benefited from living in a milieu and a sensibility, and that there was a sort of, he never talked about there being a sort of torch-bearing, but it did feel that there was a torch-bearing that he had learned from his idols and mentors who had come up through the 40s and 50s and 60s and into the 70s, and then we all popped up in the 80s, and he kind of very much encouraged us to know that there was this thing about collective work. And that's what he was interested in, but that he was not the pioneer of this. This was a sensibility, and that we were just the next in the line. And I think he had that sense of service. He was in service to that sensibility, and he was carrying a flame, and so why would he ever give that up?
And he was in the conversation, he was very cheeky. He was he was really, really sort of funny and sprightly. And do you want to say something about the campaign to preserve his cottage? Because obviously we've both been involved in that, and it's at quite a crucial point at the moment.
Yes, well, the first thing I think it's important to tweak, because somebody I bumped into last night asked me, why do you need to raise £3.5 million for a wooden cottage at Dungeness? And I want to make clear now that we're going to tweak that message. We are, so Derek Jarman lived in the latter years of his life in this cottage at Dungeness in Kent, on the south coast, which was, I always say that it was his toolbox. He worked there. If any of you have seen or are going to see The Garden, which we're screening here next week, we shot The Garden there, and he made work for the last 10 years of his life there. And not 10 years, actually, a little less. But anyway, it was definitely his world of work. And it was originally a little wooden cottage, like a shack, and we bought it off this lovely little old lady who had pink chintz curtains and things, and Derek kind of went in, and within a week he'd kind of, scoured it and painted it black inside and out and all the rest of it. Anyway, it's an amazing and beautiful thing. And he died in 1994, and his companion in his last years, Keith Collins, had been painstakingly preserving it, and because it became a bit of a tourist destination, and buses would turn up with all sorts of, very honourable Japanese tourists, but it was a thing, being able to keep the garden, because he created this extraordinary garden there out of stones and grew things that nobody thought would ever be able to grow in sand. And so keeping it going was a little bit of a strain for Keith. And very, very sadly, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, Keith very suddenly and unexpectedly died. And the house will have to be sold for all sorts of, worldly reasons. And our idea is which Keith, I talked to Keith about this before he died, in fact, before he was ill, about 5 years ago, about taking it off his hands, buying it for, and when I say the nation, I'm not interested in any boundaries here, for the culture, and running residences there, so that if somebody is wanting to write a last draft of their book, their script, their anthology of poetry, if they want to pioneer some kind of gardening that they aren't able to do anywhere else, if they're an activist who needs to go and really dig deep and walk by the beach and get the inspiration from that place, and it can do it in a way that nowhere else can do, then this residency, we hope, which we need that money to run for at least 10 years, will pay for. And so that's what we're trying to raise the money for. So we set our bar at 3.5 million. We've got 74% of it. We are so nearly there. We've got 2.5 million. We've got just under, we've got 886. I looked at the total today. It's something like 886,000 to go. And if any of you are inspired, go on, look at it online. If any of you are inspired by it and can give anything, it would mean that you were joining in this project and keeping it a collective thing. And I think it's very important that all of us have used the word save and protect and preserve. It's not that we're just wanting to buy a thing and keep a thing for thing's sake. We are trying to preserve the possibility of that place being an active battery for artists' lives, which is what it always was for Derek and for all of us, because we all worked there. And so Derek was always so dedicated to process over product, and that's really the project, is to keep it alive and humming and just keep that flame going. And so do please check it out if you're at all interested. And I'm going to be screening the garden here next week, and going to try and spread the word about it there, and we might even get some buckets out the front. But do please check it out, and if you're interested, please, and if you know anybody who's got even deeper pockets, please encourage them to support it, and then apply for a residency.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to Orlando. I saw Orlando when it first came out. My partner, my wife, Linda Reith Williams, is a professor of film, and she teaches Orlando every year. So I've watched it most years since it first came out, and she's said it's one of the films that really catches the students off guard, because if you haven't, I feel like everybody should have seen it, but if you haven't seen it, it's a very, very unexpected film. Can you say something about how Orlando came about and why that story is so important to you?
So Orlando is a film directed by Sally Potter, beautifully costume designed by Sandy Powell.
Sandy, you should just come up here on stage, because otherwise we're just going to keep throwing to you. It's inspired by the novel by Virginia Woolf. And it is an extraordinary book, and if you haven't read it, I would go out and get that too. And when we presented it last night, and we were ruminating, Sally and I, on what a long time ago it was, a time when if you went and asked anybody for money to make a costume film, they went, what? Why would anybody want to see a costume film? This is in the days when, who were making costume films? It was a sort of nostalgia costume films, like Merchant Ivory, really. But the whole idea of reinventing a kind of historical portrait was really quite radical at the time. And we had very little
capital. We'd had very little reputation. Neither of us made many films, and it was a long road to raise the money for that film. We eventually found the money for the film, the first money for the film, in Russia. The Soviet Union was just sort of, evolving, and the Lynne film and Mosfilm and these big industrial complexes were sort of breaking up into independent production companies. And we had gone around the West. There's a very funny and ridiculous story about, well, I will tell you that if you go up to the little exhibition up the stairs here, which is laughably supposed to be full of all of my amazing artifacts. Well, I was so embarrassed watching that clip because for years, I kept several of those gold coins. I kept them in a little box. Why did I keep them? Presumably because one day maybe the BFI might ask me for them. And I lost them, and then Isabel was asking me for them, and I couldn't find them, so I don't know. If I find them next week, I'll bring them down. But and even that headscarf I kept for years. But in that exhibition are some photographs that Sally and I took at Knoll, which is where Vita Sackville West, which Virginia Woolf wrote Orlando for Vita Sackville West, where she lived. And we went to Cannes to try and raise money for this film. These two total hicks with absolutely and in 1988, 1989, very pre-digital, and we made these books, these really beautiful linen-bound, embossed books, and these photographs of me. We pooled our money and we went to whatever it's called, Berman's and Nathan's costume hire, and we hired one Victorian woman's gown and one Elizabethan doublet and hose, and we went down in my little car and we bought our visitors' tickets in Knoll, which is a big old stately home, and they said, don't take photographs. And we sort of, I jumped behind a bush and changed and then came out and took a photograph. And those photographs were stuck into these books. And off we went to Cannes with 100 of them. And as anybody who's ever been to a film festival knows, people, when you arrive at Cannes, they inundate you with all this nonsense for all the films they want to get made. And you just stick them in the bin. So 98 of these books got thrown away. But Sally and I kept one each. And the photographs are upstairs. Anyway, that was the beginning. And that film was eventually funded with money from Russia originally, and then France, Germany, Holland, some from England. And we shot in Uzbekistan and in St. Petersburg on the Frozen Sea, and we shot in England, and we shot in 10 weeks, and it was grueling. And it's an extraordinary thing. It's very handmade. Sandy Powell, I don't know what your budget was for these incredible clothes, but I do remember that you went to, Brick Lane and found saris and made 18th century pannier dresses out of them. They probably cost about $5 each. It was very, very red in tooth and claw.
We're going to show the transformation scene, which I have on very good authority is one of the most written about in academia sequences from any modern film. So this is the scene in which our central figure changes gender, and this is kind of the centre of the film itself. There we go.
I just want to say that I noticed as we were watching it that you asked me a question that I didn't answer, why it might be that this film, and the book, of course, but the film in particular is so resonant for people. And I do believe that it is partly to do with its time, and it was made at a time when there was becoming this thing which was coined by our friend Ruby Rich, great film writer, queer cinema. It was actually named as such, and it was becoming a thing in the early 90s that people really started to look for. It was a current that people were really drawing on. That's one of the reasons. It had a sort of vibrancy to it. But I'm intrigued by Orlando forever because recently I had the opportunity to edit an edition of Aperture magazine, and I chose to make as the subject of the edition Orlando, a revisitation of Orlando, and I reread it again, and I realized that Orlando the book, and to a certain extent Orlando the film, has this reputation, this legend of being about gender only. And it truly, truly isn't. It's so much more than that. It's truly, the book is absolutely not that interested in gender at all. It's about freedom. It's about freedom from class prescription. It's about freedom from national prescription. It's about freedom from time. It's about immortality. And gender is just one of those little sort of gnat's breaths. And my fantasy about Orlando, which I was telling Isabel the other day for Sight and Sound, is that if Virginia Woolf had written another 1,000 pages, then Orlando might have, I don't know, turned into a piece of paper next week, or she might have turned into a commode clock. That feeling of limitlessness, boundarylessness. And that is in Sally's film, there's no question.
And that's also right there in that phrase when it's the same person.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of it. It's like, okay, well, there we are.
Yeah,
same person.
that's it.
Gender, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
it moves
no
on.
drama about it.
Like Derek Jarman, you had a long-standing relationship with Sally Potter. You have had long-standing relationships with certain filmmakers. What is it that you look for in a filmmaker that says, because you do work again and again with certain filmmakers, what's the connection?
Well, it's always about the person and the particular conversation. I have, as you say, a long-standing relationship with Sally Potter, but the fact is we've only ever made one film together, which is that. But that was a long time in coming. I mean, the gestation for that. Well, I say that. I mean, at the time, I think it took us 5 years to make. Since then, made films with Luca Guadagnino that took 12 years or 25 years. You know, those long gestations are the name of the game, certainly in my neck of the woods. But yeah, it's about the conversation. And in Sally's and my case, we had one very long, very fascinating conversation, and on it goes. I mean, last night we were introducing that film again after 27 years, and I think it's going to go on. I mean, especially if they re-release it, we'll be banging the drum forever.
And you and Joanna Hogg worked on her student films, and then of course, recently in the new films. And again, that's a very lengthy.
Yes.
So
well, it's a relationship. And that is something. I mean, if there's a real trick of the light miracle in my life that I'm so grateful for, a blessing that I'm so grateful for, it's that lightning struck with Derek. I got what I really needed in order to become a film artist, which was a relationship that meant that I could have a sense of authorship and that I could work collectively from project to project. I worked with Derek for over 9 years, 7 films or something. And the conversation was the important thing. And then every year or so, we would make a film that came out of that conversation. But the conversation was the ongoing thing. The miracle is that after he left the building in 1994, I met and found other people who wanted to work in that way. And that's incredible. I mean, lightning has struck more than once for me. And I think there are a number of people. Bong Joon-ho, I have an ongoing collaboration with. We are already talking about several other things. Joanna Hogg, as you say, Wes Anderson, Jim Jarmusch, Luca Guadagnino, Lynne Ramsay, and I. It's just what I like, but I'm obviously not the only one, and that's the lucky thing.
Okay, so we're going to strike a couple of those points a little bit further on in the discussion. I want to play a clip from Michael Clayton. I'm terrible at remembering awards. I am right in thinking that you won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for Michael Clayton.
I think you're right.
I think that's right, okay. I have to ask you, was it a big deal?
It was a strange deal, I'll be perfectly honest, because here's the thing, and I don't know if this is still the case, because I still don't have a television, but...
Do you not? You've never had a telly?
I used to have a telly. I was a telly addict, which is why when I had children, I didn't get a telly. No, I just haven't had a telly for a very, very long time.
And that's a principle thing, or it's just a habit thing now?
I would be watching it all the time if I had a telly, so no, I have other things to do. Seemingly not.
Oh, okay, fine, okay.
Seemingly not, for some of us. No, I love the telly. But I had never seen the Oscars. Now, I don't know if people now, in this day and age, see the Oscars, but in those days, nobody watched the Oscars, and I'd never seen it. And then we went, and it was very mad, because I was, there for not only the wonderful Tony Gilroy, but for the great George Clooney giving, in my humble opinion, the performance of his life in Michael Clayton. I mean, truly a masterwork.
And in fact, we will see it in the scene that we see coming up.
He's phenomenal. And I was asked along for the ride, and I had this sort of rather mad task of playing that exotic thing, which I didn't really know what it was, a corporate lawyer. White witch, easy. And so and we went along for the ride. It was kind of ridiculous. And I realized when I got into the room that I was saying to myself, oh, it's smaller than I'd thought. And then I said, hang on, what do you mean? What do you mean? You've never watched it? And I realized I'd watched The Bodyguard with Whitney Houston. And in that film, somebody gets shot, by the way. And that was my reference, was The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston. And yeah, so no, it was a weird deal. But what I will say is that I had cleared my emails that morning. And when I went home in the very late early hours of the following morning, I had something like 435 emails. And I went, oh, this prize is really famous. That's the thing.
How many people here have seen Michael Clayton? Okay, fine. So I'm going to assume that's everybody because we're about to spoil it because I'm literally going to show the end of Michael Clayton. But I kind of figure there's a certain period after which it's like, look, if you were really going to see Michael Clayton, you would have seen it already, okay?
Well, and these days they probably would put that scene in the trailer. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. So there's a whole bunch of stuff goes on, and at the end of it ends with this fantastic confrontation between you and George Clooney, without having to sort of go through all the mechanics of the plot. What's brilliant about it is that he is at this moment. It's his moment of having kind of finally arrived at the powerful side, and your character is completely caught off guard by the fact that he's even there at all. It's a slightly long scene, but I love it. Not only because I think that you're brilliant in it, but I do think you're right that George Clooney has never been better than in this scene.
And Tony Gilroy, and this scene is a very good example of this. And I know this may sound crazy that not more people do this, but Tony Gilroy writes different voices for different characters, and you can really see it in this scene. They are at odds.
And if Quentin Tarantino is watching, try to learn to do that.
Oh.
Can I ask you, this is asking an actor a question about how acting works, which I understand is kind of, hard to answer. An awful lot of that is over the shoulder of George Clooney looking at your face, looking at your reactions. Mm-hmm. And the thing that tells us what's happening is the panic in the character as she's trying to figure it out. And it's tiny movements. It's tiny, movements of the eye and tiny movements of the mouth. When you're doing that, are you doing it instinctively? Are you doing it? Is it something that you're aware of? I mean, explain to me how that magic works, because I don't understand it.
It's a really good question, and I'm not necessarily the right person to ask about acting, Mark. I'm serious, because I don't.
I think you're quite good at it.
No, but I don't know how to talk about it for sure. But what I can tell you, and this won't sound like a proper actor, is for me, this is a question about the frame. And what is the shot? What is the lens? And what is the scale? That's always really important for me, because if you shot that in long shot, then you're going to be you're parlaying a whole different sort of set of calibrations, because you're dealing with a full body, and you're dealing with distance between the two of you, and you're dealing with your relationship to the room or whatever. But if you know that it's that middle lens and you're that close, then yeah, you realize that, okay, I mean, I'm literally just thinking about that scene. It's she, because I can't talk about George Clooney because I don't know what he was doing. He was just being fucking incredible. She's lying. So the whole relationship with her words, what she's actually saying, and what the tide is going out with what she's actually feeling and what she wants to say but she can't say, and what she's trying to hide. That's the interesting push me pull you. So there's sort of odds between what pops out of her mouth, these slight sort of stilted lawyer language truisms. Sorry, my divine lawyers are in the audience, and I know that not all lawyers are like Karen Crowder. But,
not all murderers.
No. But there's a whole sort of undertow of how that face delivers those words. And she's not a good actress, which is a great get-out clause, actually, when you're playing a character like that. She's actually a very bad actress, but she's trying to be really good and really slick and deliver the goods. So that, I don't know if that answers your question, but knowing that you're in that kind of scale, knowing that the camera can see all of that, it gives you a sort of palette to work with. So you know that, if you're gonna lick or bite, if you're in long shot and you bite your lip, it doesn't matter. But if you're biting your lip that close up, and if the other character is that close up, then that means you are losing it, because you can't lie well enough to look like you're holding it together. I don't know if that answers.
It does. And let me ask you a last thing about it. Was that, obviously they'll do different versions of the scene, but will you do long takes together so the thing has a momentum?
Yes,
or is it
yes.
fine? Okay.
As far as I remember, we shot that complete a lot. And by the way, from lots of different angles and from lots of different distances. I mean, there were long shots of it. And there's that amazing moment at the end what I thought you were going to do is go all the way out into the car, but she goes down onto her knees and he goes out and the whole thing follows. Then it becomes long shot, and then it's about the space in the room. And then, of course, but then everybody works differently. I mean, I've just finished working with Apichatpong Weertsetikul. I'm very proud to say that, to be able to say it, but I'm also very proud to be able to say that I'm his colleague. And the film that we make, we have 15-minute takes. And the same with Joanna Hogg as well. We work in these very long, complete takes with knowing that we're not going to be cutting in, and knowing that the whole scene is going to be held from that one perspective of a non-moving camera. Those two filmmakers are similar in that way. And that's a whole different ballgame, because then you're dealing with, you have to, again, for me, it's all about the frame. That's what's my question. That's why I don't feel like a proper actor, because I don't think, my sense of proper actors is that they're very involved with what they're doing, and that's why they're so great, and they carry that package into all these different frames, and there's a sort of continuity. But I'm such a nerd, I like knowing if this was a long shot, I mean, these things are significant, and the fact that that's behind us is significant, and the fact that you can't see my feet is significant. And it's important that we know that when we are, because otherwise, if we really want it, then I will put my foot there. And then you see, it's all to do with the balance of what's being held in the frame.
Do you carry that with you in general life as well? Are you aware of being looked at-ness?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. No. I mean, it's the great joy of the cinema. I mean, that cadre, that frame, that's a thing I'm really in love with.
So I want to ask you now about working with Lynne Ramsay on.
Yes.
Obviously, we've gone from the film for which you won the Academy Award, well done, to the film for which you won the Kermode Award, better well done. So I remember reading the book of Kevin and thinking, this is not filmable. It's, and I'm a huge fan of Lynne Ramsay's work, and I think that film is just devastating. And we'll move to the clip quite quickly, because I think it's best to see a bit first and then talk about it afterwards. What's happening in this sequence is that there's a number of different time frames. So you were just talking about an actor bringing something into, so there's a number of different time frames kind of interwoven. And it's always seemed to me, and I'll ask you about this after the clip, that one of the central themes of We Need to Talk About Kevin, which for some people is a film about an evil child and the effect that the evil child has on the mother, is that actually it's the other way round. It's about, fine. Okay, so let's look at the clip and then you can agree with me. Okay. I love that film. I think just on every level, it's pretty much perfect. Describe for me the character that you play in it and what is going on with her.
Well, first, I want to just say that you were not alone in reading that amazing book, which again you should go out and read, and thinking it's unfilmable. It's a fat one, and it's also. The book, when I reread it not long ago, I remembered how political it is. It's very much about a political moment. And so when Lynne started when we both started talking about adapting it, and she started adapting the screenplay. We realized that, you've got to hone in on something. I mean, something's got to give. And so the idea of going into the interior world of the mother became clear. That was where you went. And that's where all the inspiration comes for all that backwards and forwards and all the questioning. Because the whole thing is built on a question mark. What is it? Is it chicken and egg? Is it the boy who's just evil? Is there such a thing as evil? Is the mother just so dysfunctional that she's created this devil's seed? It's all a question, and it goes on being a question, spoiler alert, all the way through. There isn't really an answer. And so locating that question in her head, in her consciousness, was a real key to not only developing the screenplay, but also developing the performance. So she's a very successful travel writer. She's got an imprint actually upstairs in the little exhibition upstairs. I hope that they've put these wonderful props, which we had on the set of her travel writing books, with my biography on the back. She's hilarious. But she's a very successful travel writer. She's complete. She's one of those Americans who's absolutely in love with traveling the world and is not really that keen on living in America. And she marries this very upstanding American who likes living in America and is a little bit of a down-home boy. And then they have this child, kind of unplanned. And it all goes to pot for her. It's a nightmare from the moment he's conceived. And that's where the question mark is born. I hadn't thought of this image before, but it's like the second the embryo begins, this question mark goes, what the fuck am I gonna do with the rest of my life? And along he comes, and he just mirrors her, and there's this one beautiful. Again, I don't know how much I can spoil it, but if you haven't seen We Need to Talk About Kevin, how can we? I mean, terrible things happen, and We Need to Talk About Kevin.
I think we can say terrible things happen without saying specifically what the terrible thing is, although I think most people would probably know, but let's...
Terrible things happen, kind of unimaginably bad things happen. And there is a quite wonderful, well, you saw in that spoilering clip that she goes to visit her son in prison at a certain point. And there was a wonderful line from the book that we eventually took out of the cut, but I always minded that we didn't have it in. There's this moment when she asks him why he had done a violent thing, and he says, "Well, if you want proper attention, you're not going to kill the audience." And you realise that he's so locked in to her attention, and for some reason she just can't give it to him from the very beginning, and he's what they call acting out.
There's also the thing that he when she's trying to find out why, and he says, "I thought I knew, and now I don't." And once he's away from her, he becomes a different person.
Yeah.
That it is all to do with them being. But in your mind, when you're playing that character, do you have a version of? I mean. This sounds facile, but do you have to like and empathise with the character to play? Because you can read that film as entirely anti her character, or you can read it as entirely.
I've heard proper actors saying that they need to like and be in love with and sympathise with their characters. And again, this is another instance when I realise that I'm not equipped for that particular job, because I don't feel that way. I mean, either I'm just super low or super high on compassion, but it's just not, people do bad things, doesn't mean they're not really interesting to play, and people do great things, doesn't mean they're, too glitchy to play. I'm not really tied into that. What I'm really interested in is the uncertainty. Yeah. People not knowing in their own stories, not knowing any answers, and being on the precipice of their own sense of their own identity. I mean, this is an example I've said this many times, that I'm really, really interested in the idea of identity, and I'm not really sure I'm a believer in identity. I think it's a kind of, wake up tomorrow and choose your identity sort of existence. I'm touched by society's ability to kind of corral people into thinking that they have to choose who they're going to be at the very beginning of their lives and stay that way forever, and that they were just going to follow that code. And it's not my experience of life, and I think it's a real sadness and a waste of human life. And so what I'm always drawn to are these stories about people who are at the cusp of transformation. It doesn't have to be Orlando changing from male to female, but people who, she's a travel writer who's incredibly successful. She becomes this mother. She feels, she's moved to a McMansion. She wants to live in Greenwich Village. This whole sense of herself being molten and up for grabs, and she's not in control of it. And keeping that alive all the way through the shoot. That was what I was really interested in, just not making any decisions and making sure she never landed anywhere.
And just briefly on the subject of Lynne Ramsay, I think one of the most remarkable things about her is she held out for such a long time to make the film that she wanted to make, because the gap between Morven Caller and Kevin, I know there was a long period of working with Lovely Bones, but I think one of the greatnesses of her work is that she does what she wants to do, and she's not afraid to walk away from something if it's not right.
No, and she is completely right. She values her own talent and perspective, and she's correct too. And I worship her. I love her, and she's a real deal. Lynne. She's got a vision. And when we shot Kevin, all the American, it was interesting. I've had a little sort of run at that period. I had a little run of working with really visionary European filmmakers away from their world. So Lynne, up until that point, had only ever worked in Glasgow, and so if she needed a crowd, she would ring up all her cousins and they'd all come down, which is the way to work, which is the way we worked with Derek, and it's the way I work with Luca, and it's the way I work with Bong in Korea, and all the rest of it. That's the way to do it. But in America, it all becomes a bit different, because if you want a crowd outside the high school, and you've got a very low budget, you're only allowed maybe 10 who are SAG-registered extras, and along they come, and they may be, very inspiring people, but they may only have a certain range of facial expressions. And Lynne Ramsay is not allowed to speak to them.
You're being very diplomatic about this.
But the director is not allowed to speak to them, because if she speaks to them, she says, sorry, could you cry a little louder? That person then becomes an actor, and they have to be paid a great deal more. So the first assistant, she has to say, can you ask them to stop making that face? Listen, I'm all for unions. It's, the world, they make the world go round, but there are complications for independent filmmaking in America. And I worked with Eric Zonka on Julia in Mexico, and that was similarly very interesting, because he'd never worked outside France. So.
Now, you talked a lot about ambiguity in characters on the cusp of something. I want to play a clip from Snowpiercer. I heard that yesterday you described this character as Margaret Thatcher before the elocution lessons, which I think is a brilliant description. And
the hairdresser.
But this isn't a character on the cusp of something. This is a character who is what she is.
This is a total construct, though. I mean, I don't usually like the word character. I'd much rather use the word portrait, because character sounds like it feels like it's something to do with the theatre.
I now feel like I've been saying that all through the interview.
But everybody does. No, but everybody does. And again, you're used to talking to real actors, and I think they like talking about characters. I don't, because it feels like, again, that you're dealing with something fixed. Yeah. And I'm just too wishy-washy for that. But this portrait is the portrait of a complete construct. And Snowpiercer, for those of you who haven't seen it, is about this world on a train after a terrible ecological global, which is just around the corner, by the way. And this perpetual engine in this train goes forever round the world, round the world, round the world. And on the train, you have this very sharply, if anybody's seen Parasite, this is a precursor, sharply, this is what Bong calls the horizontal version of Parasite, which was the vertical. You have all these different compartments, and you have the tail section, which is basically the slave quarters, and you go all the way up. There's a revolution on the train, and people move up to the front section, which is like, the ivy. And but you have in this world, people are free to become mutants, and Mason is the politician, and you put a politician in that kind of free, unconnected, unregulated environment, and all hell breaks out, and people start behaving no-how and being very extreme. And so this Mason character, I always had a fantasy that Mason is in fact a man, but is in drag, and that I'd always like to go into Mason's cabin and see what, take off the bra with the breasts in it and hang it on the side. But it's a very weird character. Started out as a man in a suit and ended up being this.
Okay, let's have a look. Was this you or Bong?
Do you know a funny thing about that? That's one of the very few examples of Bong, I won't say not knowing what he was doing, but changing his mind about something. Bong just so scrupulous and so organised, and works, with a highly, highly developed I can't speak, sorry, jet lag coming from Scotland, storyboard, and everything is and also with an editor right there, so you're working all the time to what the previous shot was, and you know exactly how high your hand has to be for to match and all the rest of it. But he wanted me to do this because there was going to be, again, spoiler alert, at the very end, how do I say this in code? Somebody is secreted in a place, and the original idea was that it was all going to be about hands, and it was all going to be about this slotting in of hands into sort of locking position in the bottom of the train. And as we worked, that was, I think, the first day that I shot, as we worked, he got a bit of a fetish about Mason, and particularly Mason's teeth, and Mason's mouth, and Mason's nose, which was I'd always wanted to play a character whose nose was up like that, because it makes your whole face go like that, and it makes your mouth go like that, and your eyes go like that. Anyway, so we made a nose and did that. And he called it piggy nose. He loved it. But he became very, very interested in the mouth. And so he was always going to dispose of Mason with the hand, and then eventually he decided, again, spoiler alert, to dispose of Mason in the mouth. So he actually morphed it. So that's a little bit redundant, that thing.
But I love it. It's because it's
texture.
Because it looks like it's telling you something about the way in which her mind is working.
And also something slightly inhuman.
Yeah.
I mean, is she, in fact, as I say, she's a construct. She's built up with all this weird prosthetic wig, fur coat on, Chanel suit, mad, is it a man, is it a woman, whatever it is. And is she, in fact, a machine? I mean, at this point, we really don't know anything. Although you do, because I've just told you.
What's it like working with director Bong? Because I knew John Hurt quite well, and he said that it was the best experience. He said two things. He said, firstly, I loved it because everyone refers to him as director Bong, and they're all incredibly sort of. And he said, and secondly, he knows exactly what he's doing, with the exception of that thing that you've just said, in which he didn't. Yeah. But what is he like to work with?
Well, he did. He just changed his mind.
Yeah.
He's a dream. He's an absolute dream, and he's, as I say, he's so meticulous. But at the same time, he's being that meticulous, he's very free. So he makes it very free for us. Certainly for me, I always feel incredibly relaxed because it's all set up so clearly. And as I say, because you're working with the editor can say, the shot before this shot we're just about to do, is like this. And so you know exactly how to walk in, you know exactly how to walk out. But the space in the middle is your playground. You can just do whatever you want to basically amuse Bong, which is what we all love to do. And
does he laugh? Is he funny?
Oh my God, he's hilarious. Do you know him?
No. I'm a film critic. I don't know anyone.
You don't know Mark? I'll sort you out.
Thank you.
He's a complete delight. He's full of vim and vigour and very, very relaxed. And but I think that precision really makes it such a free process. I mean, he's up for being amused. You know, all these little things. I mean, he was saying when we were showing the film the other night, that little moment in that section where I'm just about to start talking and somebody drops something behind me is completely improvised. And he was up for it, you know. And there are other directors who are very meticulous who might say, no, I wanted you to start speaking, and they stay fixed in what they originally wanted, and they're not open to whatever nonsense you come up with. But he's totally up for all the nonsense.
What's Abhijit Restical like? Is he? I'm just saying, just so I can show that
Yes.
I can say it as well.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sounds different when you say it.
Good fun.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I love him, Joey, as we call him.
That's so much easier.
He. For those of you who don't know him, Apichat Bong is a great Thai filmmaker. He won the Palme d'Or. Oh God, do you know what? It's 10 years ago, because it was when we were shooting Kevin. It's a long time ago.
Wow.
Yeah, for Uncle Boon Me, who recalls his past lives, and he's a really great filmmaker, and he works in a sort of dreamscape. And he and I met about 10 years ago, and we wanted to work together, and we had this idea for a film, but we knew that we wanted it to be a kind of a reverie about a sort of foreignness, and so we decided we wanted to make it in a place that neither of us knew. And this is going to be really wanky and make us sound like we're total world travelers, but we couldn't think of a place that neither of us really had been. And it was awful. We kept saying, I said, oh, I'd love to go to Japan. He said, oh, I've worked in Japan many times. So I would say, well, he would say, I'd love to go to Scotland. And I went, I mean, I'd love you to come to Scotland, but I do live there, and all of this. And then finally he rang me one day and said, I'm at the Cartagena Film Festival in Colombia. Colombia is the place. So we shot last summer in Colombia, and then the film is just being finished. I'm going to do some sound on it tomorrow, actually. And I hope it might go to Cannes or Venice, so it's coming soon.
I would say the amazing thing about Uncle Boon Me, who can recall his past lives, is that he can't.
No.
This is a weird title thing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Another spoiler.
Well, yeah, okay. I want to show one last clip, but it's a longer clip, and then there are some questions from emerging filmmakers. This is it's more than a music video. It's a short film that happens also to be a music video, and it's from 2013, I think, with David Bowie. And it's tell us how this came about and what we're about to see, because we are going to show it in its. Because I looked at it several times and thought you actually can't cut this. It doesn't make any sense to cut it.
Very
so
nice.
Tell us about it.
Well, I was privileged to know Bowie a little bit a long time ago. I met him on a street corner, actually, in London, in West London, and we just started talking, and then we met with some other friends, and anyway, we sort of knew each other a tiny little bit through the ether, and then I was actually on a rare holiday, and the phone rang, and it was David Bowie on the end of the phone. And he rang up and he said, I got your number and I want to do you want to be in the video for my new... I mean, can you believe this?
No.
It actually happened. And Floria Sigismondi, who's a great, makes particularly beautiful music videos, but also is a filmmaker, very interesting filmmaker, who's a friend of his, shot this film. And I went to LA and we shot it there.
So
the stars are out tonight.
Were you friends with him by that point, or were you just acquaintances?
We were acquaintances, and I was, of course, a super fan who was pretending not to be a super fan, like everybody else on the planet. But we were just very warm. We just had a very, very nice... He was a fan of Derek's, and he recognised me on the street corner. Can you believe it?
Is that how it happened? So he recognised you?
He recognised me. He said, Tilda. And I went, what? And we started chatting, and then I remember a couple of years later, a friend of ours has a shoe shop, and he was in there, and I went in, because I used to go and hang out with my friend, and there he was, and he was shooting. We started talking about cinema, because he was shooting with Scorsese, playing Herod in The Last Temptation of Christ, and he was really funny about it. I mean, he was such a, I don't know, just always disarmingly just beginner's mind about everything. And by then, of course, he'd made The Man Who Fell to Earth and God knows what else, and Labyrinth and all the rest of it. But he was talking as if he'd never been on a film set before, and he was saying, oh my God, filming, how do you do it? It's exhausting. And we've been in the desert, and it was anyway, it was that. And then after we shot this, we became very close pals.
Okay, we're going to show the whole thing. It's about 6 minutes long, but it needs to be seen in its entirety.
Yes.
Okay, here we are. I mean, It is really, really good. And I just sit there watching it thinking, I can't imagine what a cool experience it must have been to do that.
It was pretty cool.
Was he everything that you would have wanted him to be?
And more. And more. The thing that I want to say about him, which I think is the most emblematic and important thing, is he was so happy. He was just a happy person. I mean, presumably he had moments when he wasn't as happy as when I knew him, but he was just so up for it and such a laugh. And yeah, this beautiful line in the film when I first go into the supermarket and we say, we have a nice life. That's what we always used to say to each other. We used to sign our emails, we have a nice life, we have a nice life.
There was a lovely quote in an interview with him in which he said, you know, when I was young, I always thought that, you know, being a rock star, being married to a supermodel would be great. And it is.
Exactly. Exactly. Great, very difficult question, Ed. Well, of course, they're all different. And some of them do go on for a very long time. I mean, Suspiria, which Luca Guadagnino and I made a couple of years ago, we had been talking about for over 20 years. He'd been thinking about it for 30 years, I think. And we just, every year or so, we'd have another little conversation about it. And then, of course, doing everything else. I often say I live in a village in the Highlands, and where there aren't that many filmmakers who live there, and if I'm talking to somebody who doesn't understand what I do, I say, and it's the most accurate thing I can say to describe the world of my work. It's like being a farmer, you know, you're planting all these different things, and whoops, some of them come up really fast, and some of them take a long time, and some of them don't come up at all. And you just try and surf the wave and get the timing right. So you go, oh, this is going to be up next year. Okay, well, let's make sure that one, we just put a little more mulch on that one, and then that can come up the year after. And then, you know, it's all about that. And the conversations can have very intense sections. I mean, usually if the screenplay is being written, which, by the way, it's not always. I mean, Joanna Hogg doesn't work with a screenplay at all. She works with it's almost like a short story, which she writes, but she doesn't develop a script because we improvise. But if there is a script that's being written, that might be developed, and depending on what the atmosphere of my work is with that filmmaker, I might be someone who's a sounding board for the development of that script. Or I might be co-producing, so I might be more going out and trying to find support financially or trying to find crew. It's just, you know, it's like throwing a party. You know, you've got to get the venue, you've got to get the cast list, you've got to decide what you're going to eat. It's just a long process of preparation. And it sometimes is really long. But the long gestations I always find wonderful, because the second you actually do get green lit and you're shooting, you go, oh, I wish we had a little more time to prepare. And you value every single month of that preparation. I mean, when we made I Am Love, Luca Guadagnino, and we made I Am Love, we'd been developing it for 12 years. And in the very first draft of that screenplay, it described this house, which was a house that didn't exist, and it was part palace, part prison, part, I don't know, like dungeon. But we didn't know where the house was, and all the time, everything else was happening, the raising of the money, the writing of the script, the getting of the crew, and all the rest of it. The house didn't exist. And Luca was looking at, you know, book after book, you know, he was spending all his development money on these big, you know, coffee table books of amazing houses in Italy. And I think literally 3 months before we started pre-production, that house that we eventually shot in, which is pretty much the most important character in the film, became available. So how grateful were we that we had gone on that long? And then you get other projects where people are not old enough, and then lo and behold, 6 years later they are old enough, or people are too old to be your 12-year-old child. They all just, you know, so I've never minded those long gestations. I think they're to be used well, because when the clock starts ticking, you're going to really wish you had a little more time to chew the cud. I had this great privilege years ago of being invited to teach at the film school in Berlin when Reinhard Hauff was running it. And I went, and I didn't know quite why I was going, but I wanted to go. And I arrived, and they were all directing students. And I said, what do you want of me? And they said, we are all terrified of actors. And we know we've got to work with them. And a few of us have had really gnarly experiences making, first shorts, and they've bullied us, and we're terrified. And so I developed this little course that I've actually taught since, which is kind of great. I'll come and teach you. And this is the nub of it. Contact the human. Just contact that human and understand who they are, what their intelligence is, and how they're going to be comfortable enough to do with you what you want to do together. And one of the things that I do when I teach this course is I put these filmmaking, directing students in the position. I mean, I do this very simple exercise, which is very corny, but I get a chair and I put one of them there, and we all go down the end of the room, and we put a spotlight on them, and we all go down the end, and we all go, what do you think? And then somebody goes up with a light meter and goes, and then somebody goes like this. And then afterwards, you ask him, and you say, what was it like? And he says, I was so paranoid. I thought the reason you brought the light meter was I wasn't giving enough light, or, I wasn't looking good enough in the suit, or whatever. And they all realized that that is the deal. It is a hard spot, It's not easy, and it can really tweak people's nerves in weird ways, and people can start resisting because they just feel unsafe. And the more you can really think your way into that, really understand, and of course, ideally, get to know them well enough that they share with you what they're say, you know what, I really hate it when, my bottom's showing or something. You say, okay, good to know. I will either work with you on how to make you feel good about your bottom showing, or we will just not have any shots with your bottom, and you just find a way of engaging with their sense of relaxation. And you just contact the human, They're not there because they want to make your life hard. And it's not that exotic an experience being in the spotlight, but it is particular. And if you can think your way into it, then you're going to make much better headway with keeping a connection with them. And then the next thing, work with your friends. You're so valuable because your taste and tooth for documentary is really to be cherished. I'm really happy that you're going to make narrative features because that's what we need. I personally long for that. I long for what I call the unwatched face. I mean, what I love about documentary is that absolute transparency and the way in which, not only when you're looking at humans, but particularly when you're looking at humans, you're looking at people who are not used to being looked at. They haven't prepared their face. They're not doing anything with it. They're just present. They may have never seen themselves, and they have that sense of openness. And that's what I love in performance. I mean, that's my sweet spot, and that's, by the way, why I'm working with Joanna Hogg and working with Apichatpong, because that's what we parlay together. So I think that's really magic in there. That's what I want to see. I want to see translucent performance. I have this sort of thing. People always think I'm being flippant when I say that my favorite performance of all time is the donkey in O Hazar Balthazar. But I'm serious. That is my North Star of performance. I mean, for sure there were several donkeys, but the performance is that of a donkey called Balthazar, and we are with that creature in the way in which we are with creatures in documentaries who happen to be human, in a way that's very hard to be. It's very rare that actors, even wonderful actors, can be translucent. And so I'm really happy to know that you're mixing it up. Although you don't have to transition, you don't need to describe anything, you're just a filmmaker. As I said, it's my comfort zone being in an experimental mode. With Derek, we were always just making it up as we went along. We never we never knew what we were doing, and so we were always improvising. And I have to say, I've noticed that even the few fuck-off big studio movies I've made have tended to be made in an experimental mood as well. For example, the first big studio movie I made was with Francis Lawrence, Constantine, which was completely made by nerds. There was all this incredible technology that they were pioneering while we were shooting.
You're the Archangel Gabriel.
I'm the Archangel Gabriel with amazing wings, which we were very excited about creating. And then even Andrew Adamson, who asked me to be in the Narnia film, he had been an animator, and then an animator director, and he said, I want to make a live-action film. I've never done it before, and it's catnip for me, that beginner's mind, that sort of, I don't know what I'm doing. I say, I'll be with you, come on, let's try. That feeling of exploration is really fuel. And long may you have it, you emerging people. Just be emerging forever. I mean, I'm not out. Just keep emerging. Keep mixing it up, and because that's what we as an audience want. And the last thing you want is to know what you're doing. And we all know films when you can smell when someone thinks they knew what they were doing. It doesn't fly. It doesn't fly. So I think that. That's really the meat and potato for me.
Thanks so much for those questions. Thanks, everybody, for coming along. We have to let Tilda go now for an hour before she's back on stage here with Wesley. You are officially the hardest working person in show business.
It's all play.
And then the season continues. Come along and see the events and the talks and the screenings. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to BFI. Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks,